The Dragon Awakens. The afternoon sun filtered through the silk curtains of Bruce Lee's Hong Kong apartment, casting long shadows across the tatami where he rested. The sweat from his last training session was still drying on his skin, and his muscles, although exhausted, pulsed with the pent-up energy of a man who never stopped challenging himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of accumulated fatigue, but also the satisfaction of knowing that, once again, he had surpassed his own limits. It was then that he heard the whisper. "You're too soft to fight." The words were spat out like venom, low enough not to be heard by anyone else, but loud enough to pierce the silence of the room. Bruce opened his eyes slowly. In front of him, towering like a wall, was the 6-foot, 225-pound body of one of the bodyguards hired to protect him during the filming of Chinese Dragon. The man, a former wrestler with shoulders as broad as tree trunks, looked at him with a sneer, his arms crossed over his chest as if daring the air itself to move. Bruce didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He just tilted his head slightly, as if evaluating a chess piece before checkmate. "Mole?" he repeated, his voice calm, almost soft. "You think I can't take you down?" The guard laughed, a guttural sound that echoed through the room. "I weigh more than you, boy. And I'm twice your size. If I want, I'll break you in half like a twig." Bruce stood up slowly, his bare feet touching the mat with the lightness of a feather. He knew that the man was not there by chance. Someone, perhaps a rival, perhaps an envious person, had planted that seed of doubt, waiting to see what would happen. But Bruce Lee was not a man who allowed himself to be provoked by words. He was a man who turned words into action. "Then show me," he said, extending his hand in an almost casual gesture. "If you are so strong, prove it." The guard didn't hesitate. In a quick movement for a man of his size, he charged forward, fists raised, ready to smash Bruce against the wall. But Bruce was no longer there. His body moved like quicksilver, sliding to the side at the last instant, while the guard's fist only hit air. Before the man could recover, Bruce spun, his right foot lashing out with a side kick that connected with his opponent's ribs with the precision of a scalpel. The impact was dry. The guard staggered, eyes wide with surprise, but he didn't fall. He growled, recovering with impressive speed, and charged forward again, this time grabbing Bruce by the shoulders, trying to lift him off the ground like he was a sack of potatoes. Bruce let him lift him, for a second. Then, in one fluid movement, he wrapped his legs around the man's waist and, using the guard's own weight against him, twisted his body in the air. The world seemed to spin. In an instant, the giant was on his back on the mat, the air escaping his lungs in a muffled groan. Bruce landed on top of him, one knee pressing into his chest, his right hand resting on the ground next to the man's head, his fingers slightly curved like claws. "Mole?" Bruce repeated, his voice still serene, but now charged with something more, something that made the guard shudder. "Or do you just not know how to fight?" The man tried to struggle, but Bruce applied light pressure to the pressure point under his jaw, and the movement ceased. It wasn't pain, it was control. Absolute dominance. "I don't fight with brute force," Bruce continued, his dark eyes fixed on the guards. "I struggle with economy of movement. With precision. With the mind before the body. You are big, yes. But size isn't everything. And you just learned this the hard way." He stood up, offering his hand to the fallen man. The guard hesitated, but accepted, allowing Bruce to help him up. When he stood, the man's shoulders were hunched, not in defeat, but in sudden understanding. He rubbed his chest where the kick had landed, then looked at Bruce with an expression that mixed respect and embarrassment. "Sorry," he muttered. "I didn't know." Bruce smiled, a genuine smile, without a trace of arrogance. "Now you know," he said, turning to grab a towel. "And that is more important than any excuse." The guard nodded, still stunned, and left the room in silence. Bruce watched him go, then returned to the mat, where he knelt and took a deep breath. That moment, that confrontation, hadn't been about proving anything to anyone. It was about something deeper. About what happened when someone dared to question not just their ability, but their essence. He knew that this would not be the last challenge. There was always someone bigger, stronger, faster. But Bruce Lee didn't fight others. He fought against the limits that others tried to impose on him. And that day, like every other day, he had one. The last dragon. The following days were marked by an eerie silence in the dojo. The younger students whispered in the corners, stealing glances at Bruce as he trained, as if they expected him to transform into something other than human at any moment. The veterans, however, kept a respectful distance, as if they had witnessed not a fight but a ritual. It was on a humid morning, when the steam from the tea was still curling in the air, that the envelope arrived. There was no sender, just his name written in precise, almost ceremonial handwriting. Inside, an invitation, or rather, a summons. A fight in Hong Kong, not in a ring, but in an inner courtyard of an ancient Shaolin temple, under the rules of Lei Tai, the challenge without limits. The opponent? A Wing Chun master who had sworn never to set foot on American soil again after a humiliating defeat years before. His name, Ip Man. Bruce didn't hesitate. I knew that this confrontation was not about technique, nor even about honor. It was about legacy. Ip Man, his former master, the man who had taught him that martial art was not brute strength, but fluidity, adaptation, the ability to become water. And now, that same man called him to prove if he had really understood the lesson. The temple smelled of incense and old wood. The weathered stone walls echoed the footsteps of the few spectators, Ip Man's disciples, silent monks, and a handful of journalists who had been allowed to record the event on the condition that they not interfere. Bruce entered barefoot, wearing only sweatpants and cloth bands wrapped around his cuffs. Ip Man was already waiting for him, motionless as a statue, his face a mask of serenity. "You've grown up," said the master, without emotion. But it grew too much. Bruce didn't respond. I knew that words didn't matter there. The combat began without warning. Ip Man advanced with a speed that belied his 60 years, hands moving in patterns Bruce knew by heart, Tan Sao, Bang Sao, Fuck Sao, but executed with surgical precision. Bruce dodged, counterattacked, but his every blow seemed to be absorbed by the void, as if Ip Man anticipated each movement before he even thought it. "You still fight like a Westerner," muttered the master, dodging a side kick with a simple step back. "Try to dominate, not flow." Bruce felt his blood boil. It wasn't anger, but frustration, an old voice that told him that no matter how hard he trained, there would always be something beyond. Something he couldn't achieve. Then, he stopped. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, something had changed. He was no longer Bruce Lee, the fighter, the movie star, the man who proved something with every blow. He was just a student. A disciple. And then, he moved. Didn't attack. Listened. He let Ip Man's rhythm dictate his own, not as an opponent, but as an extension. When the master advanced with a chain punch, Bruce didn't block, he gave in, redirecting the force with a turn of his body, using Ip Man's own momentum to unbalance him. The master stumbled, for the first time in decades, and Bruce could have ended there. A punch, a kick, a decisive blow. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out and caught Ip Man's arm before he fell. The temple was silent. Ip Man looked at him, dark eyes filled with something Bruce hadn't seen in years, pride. "Now," said the master, with a tired smile, "you understand." Years later, when legends had already mixed with facts, and Bruce Lee was more myth than man, a young fighter sought out Ip Man's last disciple. "They say Bruce Lee beat his master," said the boy, full of arrogance. "That he was the best." The disciple, a middle-aged man with scars on his knuckles, served him a cup of tea. "Bruce didn't beat anyone," he replied. "He just stopped fighting himself." And, with a gentle gesture, he pointed to the door. "Now go." and find out what you are struggling with. The last teaching. The young fighter left the small Wing Chun studio in Hong Kong, but the disciple's words echoed in his mind like a punch not thrown. He had expected a story of glory, an account of how Bruce Lee had humbled Ip Man in combat, how the dragon had surpassed his master. Instead, he had heard only silence and a truth that hurt more than any defeat. He walked through the narrow streets, where the smell of burning oil and dried fish mixed with the sweat of the workers. The sea lapped against the piers, and the wind carried the distant sound of a radio playing an old song. He stopped in front of a rusty sign, June Fan Academy, Bruce Lee. The place was abandoned, the walls were peeling, the tatami was covered in dust. But still, something there attracted him. He pushed the door, which creaked like an old bone. Inside, just shadows and the echo of footsteps that weren't yours. In the center of the room, a punching bag was shaking slightly, as if someone had touched it moments before. He walked over and ran his hand over the cracked leather. A dark stain, perhaps dried blood, marked the surface. "Do you think you know what strength is?" The voice came from behind him. The young man turned around, ready to fight back, but there was no one. Just the wind coming in through the broken windows. "Strength is not about breaking bones," continued the voice, now closer, as if whispering in his ear. "It's knowing when not to break them." He spun around, fists clenched, but the room was empty. Then, in the corner, a shadow moved. It was not a person, but a memory, a slender figure in black pants and a sleeveless shirt, muscles defined like steel cords beneath the skin. Bruce Lee watched him with an ironic smile, his eyes half closed, as if evaluating a reluctant student. "You came here to prove something," Bruce said, crossing his arms. "But you don't know what you're trying to prove." "I know," the young man replied, his voice shaking. "That I'm better than you." Bruce laughed, a short, joyless sound. "Best at what? To hit harder? In winning more fights?" He took a step forward, and the air seemed to grow thicker. "I already did that. I defeated everyone who challenged me." "And do you know what I discovered?" The young man did not respond. "That it didn't matter." Bruce extended his hand, as if offering something invisible. "Every victory was a prison. Every blow I took me a little further away from who I really was." The young man felt the weight of the words. He remembered the nights he trained until he bled, the admiring looks from others, the feeling that if he stopped, everything would fall apart. "Then why fight?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Bruce got even closer, until the young man could see the thin scars on his forearms, the calluses on his knuckles, the eyes that no longer glowed with the fury they had before. Because sometimes the fight is not against the other person. It goes against the idea that you need to win. He touched the young man's chest, not forcefully, but firmly. "Here. This is where the real battle happens." The young man felt his heart beat faster. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, as if a door inside him was opening. "What if I lose?" he asked. Bruce smiled, this time with genuine sadness. "Then you will finally understand." And then, like smoke, it dissipated. The young man was left alone in the empty hall, the punching bag still swinging. He took a deep breath and, for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of the need to prove anything. Just silence. And, in the silence, an answer. He left the gym without looking back. I no longer needed legends. I no longer needed victories. He just needed himself. And, perhaps, a new beginning. The path of ashes. The young man walked through the streets of the city aimlessly, but with a strange lightness in his steps. The cold early morning air bit his skin, but he didn't care. For the first time, there was no rush, there was no expectation. Just the sound of your own steps on the wet asphalt. He stopped in front of a seedy bar, with neon lights flashing and the smell of old alcohol escaping through the cracks in the door. Inside, men with weathered faces drank in silence, as if each sip were a confession. He entered. The bartender, a man with tattooed arms and a tired look, raised an eyebrow when he saw him. "You don't seem like the type to frequent this place." "Today I am," replied the young man, sitting at the counter. He ordered a shot of whiskey, not out of thirst, but out of curiosity. The liquid burned his throat, but he didn't cough. He drank another drink. And another. "Looking to forget or remember?" asked the bartender, drying a glass with a dirty cloth. "Neither of them," said the young man. "I'm just here." The bartender laughed, a hoarse, joyless sound. "Everyone who comes in here is looking for something." The young man did not respond. He looked at his hands, still marked by calluses from training, but now without the same tension. They were just hands. Nothing more. Then, the door opened with a bang. A man entered, tall, broad-shouldered, his face covered in old scars. His dark eyes swept the bar until they landed on the young man. A slow smile spread across his lips. "I hear you're good," he said, his voice thick as a roar. "Very good." The young man didn't move. "I'm not anymore." "Lie," the man spat, approaching. "You're the boy who defeated the Detroit Lion. The prodigy. The future champion." "There is no future," the young man replied, calmly. "It only exists now." The man laughed, a harsh sound. "Then prove it." Before the young man could react, the man's fist flew towards him. He dodged it on instinct, but didn't counterattack. The next punch caught his chin, knocking him against the counter. The bartender swore and walked away. "Get up." The man growled. "Fight." The young man stood up slowly, wiping the blood from his lip. He looked at the man, not with hatred, but with a strange sadness. "Why?" he asked. "What do you get out of this?" "Respect." The man shouted, advancing again. This time, the young man didn't dodge. He let the punch hit his stomach, doubling over from the impact. The man grabbed him by the shirt, lifting him off the ground. "You are weak," he spat. "A coward." "No," the young man whispered, looking him in the eyes. "I just don't want this anymore." The man released him with a push, as if he had been burned. For a moment he stood there, panting, his fists clenched. Then something in his face broke. He turned and left the bar without saying anything else. Silence returned. The young man sat down again, ignoring the stares of the other customers. The bartender placed another shot of whiskey in front of him. "That was unexpected," he said. The young man did not respond. He drank the whiskey in one gulp and left the empty glass on the counter. "How much do I owe?" "Nothing," the bartender shook his head. "You just gave me the best story of the night." The young man smiled, a small, tired smile, and left. The last fight. The following days were strange. He didn't return to the gym. He didn't look for Bruce. He didn't look for anyone. He just walked, ate when he was hungry, slept when he was tired. Until, one afternoon, he found an old poster glued to a rusty post, "Exhibition Fight, Underground Arena, tonight." Below, in bold letters, the opponent's name, the Lion of Detroit. He yanked the poster off and crumpled it in his hand. It wasn't a coincidence. He arrived at the arena when the sun was already setting, turning the sky red. The place was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, lit by poor lights and full of screams and bets. The Lion was there, in the center of the improvised ring, warming up with punches in the air. When he saw him, his eyes lit up. "You came," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded like satisfaction. "I don't want to fight," the young man replied. "Then why are you here?" "To say it's over." The Lion laughed. "You don't decide that." "I've already decided." The audience began to shout impatiently. Someone threw an empty bottle into the ring. "Last chance," the Lion said, flexing his fingers. "Fight." The young man shook his head. No. The lion advanced. The first punch was quick, precise. The young man tasted blood again. The second knocked him down. The audience roared, thirsty. He stood up, staggering, but didn't raise his fists. Get up. Someone shouted. Finish him. Another shouted. The lion hesitated. For a second, his eyes were no longer those of a predator, but those of a lost man. Why don't you fight? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. Because there is nothing to prove, the young man replied. The lion lowered his fists. The audience fell silent. You're a fool, he muttered. Maybe, the young man agreed. But at least I'm not running anymore. The lion looked at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, he turned and left the ring. The audience erupted in boos and curses, but he didn't care. The young man got down from the ring and walked towards the exit. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even looked at him. The new beginning. He didn't come home that night. Instead, he took a bus out of the city, without a specific destination. When the sun rose, I was on a deserted road, with a backpack on my back and nothing else. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I would do. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. He stopped in a small town on the edge of a lake. There was an abandoned auto repair shop there, with a rusty sign, "Helper Wanted." He entered. The owner, an old man with calloused hands, looked at him suspiciously. Do you know how to fix engines? No, the young man admitted. Do you know anything about cars? No. The old man sighed. So what do you know how to do? The young man thought for a moment. I know how to listen. The old man looked at him. Then, without saying anything, he threw a dirty cloth towards him. Clean the tools. Then we'll see. The young man smiled. And so, without fanfare, it began.